As far as a couple of policy updates that I'd love to touch on really quickly, some really interesting action out of Hawaii, which has brought forth a couple of different bills over the last few years. There was definitely some outside money looking to support a number of years ago. I believe New Approach PAC had their fingers in the pot at some point in Hawaii, and they just advanced a task force bill. I've been pretty outspoken in my belief that task force bills don't really do a whole lot of much of anything. But given that progress has stalled in Hawaii for a couple of years, this task force bill seemingly having some serious juice is really exciting. And then another
Let's
state that
talk
I
about
just
that
want,
a bit. Like
yes,
what does a task force bill do and not do in your experience here, just based on what you've seen?
yeah, I mean, I think a really interesting person I'd love to bring on, but has expressed a lot of really colorful thoughts about this in my conversations with him is Greg Ferenstein from the Reason Foundation, who has long pointed out to me in my communications with him that task force bills really serve as recommendations and they can be put together really thoughtfully. I think that the Maryland Psychedelics Task Force report that was released last year is incredibly thoughtful, which is why it's pretty baffling to me that they're just extending the task force rather than going a little bit further and putting some substantive policy reforms in place or at least on the table. But especially when it comes to educating a state legislature about an issue that they've been cold on for a few years running, despite interest from constituents and outside organizations. And they just had the Das Center for Dying retreat down there, annual conference, I believe in Maui, which hosted a who's who of end of life care psychedelic advocates. So there's definitely a strong community. There's definitely constituent support, but the legislature's been cold. So that's where a task force can be a really interesting way to figure out how to reach the state legislature where they're at on the subject. Another great example of a task force doing a lot of good is in Minnesota, where their task force report that they released, I believe last January 2025, actually won an award from a national group that evaluates these kind of things. The thoroughness, the depth of research, the experts they got to put in some testimony in support of it. And now we're seeing Minnesota take a big swing at from my understanding, a more medicalized framework. But there's substantive